Good morning. Here with Pete Janhunen, and we're here to talk about subject of leadership as a combat multiplier. But before we get into that conversation, Pete, let's talk a little bit about last night's game. It was a great game, and great athleticism and leadership was on display.
Yeah, it absolutely was a great game, Michael. And I thought we saw two teams very well coached, very well prepared, got out there and played. And at the end of the game, it was just that little bit of difference. Once again, I hate to harp on the same thing. Came down to a little bit better leadership on the Duke side, both on the sideline but also on the court. That gave them the edge to win the national championship, well-deserved national championship for Duke.
Yeah, for Duke. And the Duke Blue Devils wins their fifth national championship under Coach Mike Krzyzewski. So you talked about that little bit of an edge that Duke had last night in leadership,
right,
particularly the coaching. Can you explain that and tie that a little bit into the subject leadership as a combat multiplier?
Well, one of the things that's interesting about using coaching as a metaphor for leadership, which obviously coaching is leadership, is there's a great quote way back before your time, back in the 70s. Bum Phillips was the coach of the Houston Oilers, and he had just gotten beat by Don Shula from the Miami Dolphins. And Bum Phillips really admired Don Shula as a great coach, won a couple Super Bowls himself, and he said, he can take your'n and beat his'n, and he can take his'n and beat your'n. Meaning, whichever team he coaches, he's going to beat you. And it was a great testament to that little bit of difference that leadership will give you on the sideline. And again, last night we saw it with Coach Krzyzewski, Coach K, trained at West Point, as we talked about on the blog the other day. Just having the key moment of the game, about 4 minutes left in the first half, a couple of his key players get in foul trouble, and he was able to stay calm, make good tactical decisions in game, but it was the tenor of his leadership that allowed his team to survive a pretty tough moment and emerge victorious, 20 minutes later in the game.
Particularly with young players, I think the biggest thing that, that surprises one of his best players was on the bench, and he did it with another point guard, a freshman point guard. The freshman point guard, he gave him the confidence to take control late in the game. Can you talk a little bit about, we have, the leadership on the sidelines, but
yeah,
how about the leadership on the court and how that transfers over to players and your team overall?
Well, there was a great anecdote actually toward the end of the game. They talked about Tyus Jones. The year before, when Duke had lost an early game in the NCAA playoffs, and Tyus was in high school, I guess he had sent a text to Coach K and said,
right,
this won't happen next year. And what a great statement. This is a kid who was, a senior in high school, who had the ability to say the right thing, connect to his coach, and give his coach confidence for the next year.
Mm-hmm.
But most importantly, and this really isn't a leadership thing, he was able to deliver with the game on the line and hit some key shots. But those emotional bonds, that confidence in one another, the trust and the confidence that my guy, this other guy has got my back, that's one of the key elements of leadership as well, as that trust and confidence.
Well, Pete hinted toward his recent blog post, and talks, as we said, leadership as a combat multiplier. And you were using Coach John Calipari and Bo Ryan.
Right.
Their matchup Saturday night. Bo Ryan had the edge that night. What did you see from that game, and how that, what Bo Ryan had that, delivered a trip to the championship game for his squad?
Right. Well, ultimately, we got to start by saying it appeared to me, just watching the game, that Duke has a better talent on the court, but so did Kentucky, probably a better talent than Wisconsin. So, when you're talking about these razor-thin differences on the court, that's where you can really look at leadership as making a difference, being a combat multiplier. And when I use the term combat multiplier, essentially what we're saying is that leadership, and good leadership at all levels of an organization, from the executive level down to the first-line supervisors, can make an organization and take it to places that it wouldn't otherwise be able to go. Still have to have the talent, still have to have the resources available, but leadership is that intangible quality that multiplies the ability of the organization to wage combat, which we're all doing in the private world in our own ways, and be victorious. And so the game last night was an excellent example of the Coach K just being, I think, a slightly more effective long-term leader within his organization and giving it that little bit of extra push to get him over the top.
Well, and about Coach K, and I think this is probably related to a lot of fields in the professional world and leading teams, whether they're small or large. But Coach K, how has he been able to do it over for nearly 30 years?
Right.
Cross-generational. We see that the shift in landscape, recruiting, the NBA influence. What is it that he has that resonates with these kids, no matter the era?
Yeah. Well, I obviously don't know the man, and I can only gauge by what I observe and what I've heard other people say. But I think that there is something special about the bond that he has with the university. I'm not sure. We can't really play out different scenarios, but Coach K took the helm of a pretty special place, a pretty distinct place, a college, but with a real bond between the student community and the kids who play for the sports, the alumni. And I think there's a sense of community and a sense of shared experience and history and legacy that was ready to be built there. I think he saw an opportunity, or at least just seized the opportunity once he had the job, to build a pretty special culture of winning and expectation and shared, not necessarily sacrifice, but shared experience. And I think there's something about Coach K being at Duke that makes a lot of this possible. Not to say he wouldn't have wanted other places, but it's a really special culture. And I'll also say that doesn't necessarily mean that when Coach K goes away, that legacy necessarily continues. There are other schools with different cultures where it almost doesn't matter who the coach is. I think Coach K and Duke, it's a special relationship, and his leadership was just well suited for the temperament of the institution. That's my observation.
That's interesting. Well, we're going to open up. Thank you for joining us today, and we're going to open it up to Twitter here and see some of the questions that are coming in for Pete. It looks like we have one here, Pete. So this is going back to Bo Ryan. He had the edge Saturday night. Sunday his team, or last night, I'm sorry, his team was close. But then after the game, he made some comments that some people didn't take too well. It had to do with the officiating and a little bit of surprise from Coach Ryan. What were your thoughts about his comments?
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty emotional moment, having taken your team all the way to the national championship, the pinnacle of this opportunity, and to fall short. And I think Bo Ryan, as any of us, is a human being, is an emotional person. We always stress when we're talking with our clients, especially humans are a mix between the rational and the emotional. We're not one or the other. We're both in different interesting combinations of ways at all times. And I think whereas Bo Ryan of a few evenings before had been sort of the rational tactician and had really led, that emotional piece kind of overwhelmed him. And frankly, my observation of the Wisconsin team, and we had some conversations before the Duke game, the culmination point, all of the effort, all of the leadership, all of the energy, all the momentum, and all the resources really went into the Battle of Kentucky. That was really the battle that they had been focused on all season. And you wondered, what does the leader, what does the team do after they've conquered the hill in their own battle plan? And in this case, I think they just came up that little bit short, and I think we saw a natural emotional response from a natural human being, and really not a quality of leadership as much as just him being human. And I'm sure he regrets some of his remarks from the officiating, especially today.
Yeah, it's always a tough moment, especially when they put so much into their effort all season long. That's dating back to October. Pete, we have another one here. So you're West Point graduate.
Yes, sir.
And person asks, based on your experiences, what is the number one attribute in leadership that has impacted you the most?
Well, the first, they taught us these principles of leadership while we were at West Point. So I was 17 years old, standing in that first formation, and they said the first rule of leadership is lead by example. And so, the number one overarching quality that we always stress to our clients and people with whom we work is you want to lead by example. And that means if you want your organization to have some values, you have to embody those values, carry those values, communicate those values consistently in everything that you do. And that's what's called building a leadership culture. And by having a leader at the top and at all levels who embody those values, it permeates the culture. And it makes people do things that they wouldn't otherwise do without the leader being present, because just the presence of the leadership values are there. And that's what helps spur organizations to even greater success than they ever dreamed possible.
Oh, that's great insight. And we saw great leadership on display these last few days. And Pete eloquently put it all into perspective in a recent blog post on LinkedIn. We're going to share that again through the 50.1 Twitter. And that's all we have for today. So thanks for joining us, and we'll be back soon.
Thanks, Michael.